So our mission statement is pheasants, quail, and other wildlife. We became involved in the Sage Grouse initiative actually because of Jim Raines, the first chairman of the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partners. It was a handshake in a bar down in Kansas after a long day of hunting, and sage grouse were definitely on the ropes. They were going to be considered to be listed at some point. This is probably 12 years ago, I suppose. And there was alcohol involved, and there was a handshake. And we lost Jim about a year after that. But the handshake was made. We honored that. So here's what happened, right? Everyone's aware that Fish and Wildlife Service was required to look at that sage grouse and determine if it was an endangered species. Something magic happened. 11 western states came together. 98 Bureau of Land Management districts came together. Natural Resources, Farm Service Agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, the Western Governors Association worked for 10 years to build a range-wide plan to make sure this bird was not listed. And they were successful. That's the new way that work will get done on the Endangered Species Act. It will be multifaceted, it'll be multi-partners, it'll be federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, will all be working together. Public lands, private lands. This is an incredible achievement that this got happened. So the hot topic today was Secretary Zinke called for a comment period of 60 days, and that just kind of wrapped up. And he scared us a little bit. He scared our world. The political side about why things happen and why things don't. Sometimes is the last person that whispered in your ear, right? Especially in this legislative environment, this political environment, and the process to have a comment period is a very healthy thing. It's not the Sage Grouse Initiative, the range-wide plan, does have its flaws. We can improve it. So let's talk about those things. The scary part was where Secretary Zinke said we could go to population base, right? Let's count birds. That'll be the way to determine that. You know, we could do a better job on predator control as a way to solve this. We could break this up into 11 state plans and have the states have control. These are all scary things when you realize it took us a decade to bring all of these partners together to actually solve this, and then the threat to break it all apart. And you realize that that sounds political. We have this new administration that we don't know yet, that we don't understand yet. They're not playing by the normal, history of how this should work. So that fear factor, the fear factor of the unknown. You're not there yet?
On Rockland right now.
You've got like 10 minutes to get that done.
It'll be up soon.
So as you look at that, our world, our NGO world, responded quickly. We responded with, kind of like my last statements. This is why this came together. This is why this worked. The Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies took it a step further. They wrote a number of white papers. And in that white paper, they addressed population management versus habitat management. And if you're not a scientist or you're not a wildlife biologist, that can almost sound logical, right? If we're worried about this bird going away, what we're really concerned about is how many we have, right? And it's like the wolf issue. In Minnesota, I think the number was if we have 1,400 wolves, we don't need to list this anymore. Well, we're at 3,000, I think, or 4,000 wolves in Minnesota, and it's still listed, right? So you use science on one side, now you don't use science on another. Boy, if we had 100,000 sage grouse in that sage steppe out there, that'd be perfect. The sage grouse was the poster child of the sage steppe. So I believe former Chief Wellner today said it. In that sage grouse 11-state region are 350 other species that live, exist, some thrive, and some will be listed there as well. To hold up this sage grouse, this iconic species, as the poster child that somebody could identify with, this is the monarch butterfly, right? Try to talk about a sage brush initiative, to talk about a sage step to your public, to your readers, show them one of those prehistoric animals, right? That's spectacular. In fact, when the bird was not listed, it was determined not to be warranted to be listed, all of that energy didn't go away. That wasn't the win, right? That's our turn at bat. Now we have to go deliver. Every one of those state partners, every one of those federal agencies, all of the NGOs, the public, the private landowners now have to go prove that we can reverse this trend. The Sage Grouse Initiative immediately changed to the Sage Brush Initiative, right? The proof statement was done. We won that first round, and now we've got to go out and prove it. Going back to Secretary Zinke's kind of thought of what else could we do? We could release birds, get the count up, and aren't we there? And everybody can go home. But again, it's not about one bird, it's about 350 species in that. Can you imagine the time and energy we could save if we can improve that sagebrush initiative in 11 states, make that workable for energy, for production, to keep those ranchers on those lands, to keep those family traditions going, to coexist? That's the win. And we don't have to look at, hopefully mule deer, antelope. I'm sure there's ground nesting birds, I'm sure there's pygmy rabbits, anything else in that 350 that we won't have to deal with. But at the end of the day, this is a habitat issue. Releasing birds, Pheasants Forever, we live in that space, right? I mean, we're a habitat organization. There isn't probably a week goes by, somebody says, why don't we just release pheasants? We can have all the pheasants we want, right? Then call it what it is. If we want to go shoot pheasants, we can go to the game farm, we can go to the hunt farm, we can go out and shoot all the pheasants we want. We can go right now, we can run up the road about 5 miles, and we could shoot 500-600 pheasants. That's not what it's about. It is about hunting, it is about that experience, right? It is about the dog. It's about your dog, right? And by the way, if you're going to think about even releasing pheasants, they've been around for 100 years in the US, and they were introduced from China, right? And it was at that moment, and it didn't just take one, there was hundreds of birds that were released at hundreds of different locations in the United States. Some of them worked, obviously. Many of them didn't. But at the end of the day here, the research and the studies that they've done for the last 50 years, it doesn't work, right? And I know that when you live in this space and you respond to your bloggers and your tweeters and you listen to your community and the people who are speaking, and you look about those easy things, right? Everyone looks for those easy answers, which is, boy, why can't we release birds, right? And they'll propagate. We'll release them in the spring, right? And they'll mature through the summer, and then we'll hunt the males in the fall, and then come next spring, the hens will still be there. It doesn't work. There's hundreds of studies that show, and every state's unique, right? Michigan did the study on Szechuans. They put $3 million into the largest breeding facility. They actually went to China, brought eggs back right out of the nests, tried to do it, didn't work. They had $5,000 left in their entire budget at the end of this program. They gave $5,000 to the local Michigan's Pheasants Forever chapters and said, go out and do habitat. It just doesn't work. And then Michigan did a really terrible thing. They had a residual population of these that they had grown in pens. They sold them to North Dakota, and then they sold them to Ohio, so they could start their own programs. Because you know what? North Dakota is not Michigan. It's different here. We can sure do it. Ohio, it's different. Michigan, you know, that's too far north. We can do these birds in Ohio. And none of those programs worked at all. What's the next thing you hear, right? What's the easy, why don't we have more pheasants or sage grouse or any ground nesting birds? Predators, right? There's myth number 2, that there's a method to solve this through predator management. It is a myth. You can impact a wild population in a very finite geography and a very finite timeline. Delta did research in the Dakotas, and they found peninsulas, and they would put a fence along, eliminate any access. They would hunt out the predators. Ducks would nest on top of each other, you know, 4-fold, 5-fold. It was spectacular. Finite geography, right? Finite timeline, because the next year you got to come back and trap it out again. And by the way, if you don't have enough predators on that, the mice population explodes, right? Snake populations explode. And now you start talking about a different predator, right? Snakes love eggs, right? I mean, all these things have a complication, and then you try to project that on a larger landscape, you can't do it. You're gonna eliminate a population and you're gonna create a vacuum. That vacuum will fill up. And Mother Nature has a neat way of responding to stress. Let's double down, right? You can talk about possums, raccoons. You move that species out of a zone, they'll double down. They'll come back to that space. They'll have larger families. You can't do it. You want to compete with predators? Have habitat on the ground. Have escape routes on the ground. And that is just another name for habitat. You want to have food source in conjunction to nesting cover, in conjunction with loafing cover, and in the winter you want a windbreak by chance, snow catches, and this is all has to be what you would just normally call nature. What do you hear out there? You know, what are those easy answers, and how do you answer those? And I'll throw that up.
Eliminate the federal government.
Eliminate the federal government. All in favor say aye. Wait. After we get Farm Bill, and then I'm in. And there's the issue too. So there's especially with Zinke's observation here of, he editorialized some things, and maybe those were voices in his ear when he was home in Montana. And you have locals who have those strong opinions about things, and that's what he kind of resonated to. I mean, the good news was that after the comment period was over, it was kind of, we're good. I think TRCP has met with them, talked with them. I think there's a comfort level.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too sort of sanguine about it all, but I think we're in a decent place right now. I think the guys are looking at this, they're not the ideologues, they're the smart people.
Yeah. And
they're starting to get a lot of pressure from the Western governors not to blow this up. And these are not liberal Democrats in these Western states. These are conservative Republicans that put this agreement together.
Now the scary part, so there's a federal look, right? Make no mistake, these same issues are going to pop up in every single one of those states individually. Those same voices that were whispering in Zinke's ear are going to be whispering in their state legislators' ear about a way to fix this problem, right? So you're going to have to defend that. You're going to have to make that statement.
Howard, I think part of the struggle is, at least from what I'm seeing, is that now we have this massive plan in place, the biggest of any conservation at any scale in history, but now you have states looking at it going, well, what's the metric for success? And when you look at other species conservation, we can point to waterfowl. They're able to point to numbers of birds increased versus habitat conserved and go, well, this is where the upside's been. And so when we look at what we're trying to do in upland conservation, the challenge is we're going, well, we're not gonna count birds, we're gonna count acres. And I think the convenient contradiction of that is conservation organizations, especially hunting-based conservation organizations, when we talk about trying to attract more people to be involved in this, we're going to talk year over year about what the pheasant forecast is, what the numbers of the birds are. We aren't preaching to the hunters that there's this many acres conserved. We're preaching to the hunters, come join our organization because there's a 10% increase in birds. But on the contrast of that, when we go to the conservation message,
yes,
we're going to say, well, we've got this many acres that we're impacting. So it's a convenient contradiction that I think is exactly where we're pinned. And I think if you look at, let me just add one more thing, and I'll let you comment on Zinke's comments. And I've seen him, and like you, I've analyzed him 10 times over. And but I think there's things he's looking at. Wyoming's going forward with their. It certainly seems like they're going to do their captive breeding program. They're going to look at programs probably from Colorado, I would assume, that were for the Gunnison sage grouse, where they've done supplemental and had, I won't call it broad success, but they're looking at it as a way to prop up a population,
yeah,
and there's studies on that. Yeah, so it's captive breeding and then release into the wild at different stages. I'll send you the links to it, but I think that's what I'm seeing as the challenges to, well, we're not going to count numbers when we have. When we have numbers being focused on in almost every other conservation effort.
Yes. So I'd say that my answer to that is knowing who you're talking to, who's your target audience, what's the message. So if we're talking to the hunting community who wants to know, what the forecast is for the fall, that's one thing, right? And that is important, right? What are the trends? Are we 10% up in this part of the state, 5% down? Where am I going to deploy my time and energy and dog? We all agree, and numbers are part of this, absolutely. From a wildlife science perspective, they are watching these birds. There is a level that they're monitoring, but it's also where are these birds? If you think about this landscape, 11-state landscape, it's not like you get to do in Minnesota here we do a mail carrier route, right? They drive, 2 square miles or something,
Nebraska is a mail carrier. We do August roadsides here, which.
Yeah, they drive and if they see birds, they count them, and that's the indicator, right? This is, I would say, big time science. They're looking at where leks are, where leks historically have been. They're looking where there's males, where there's not males, summer range, winter range. They're monitoring this, and it's not going to be very interesting. I don't think this is the lead on anyone's story, but it's the easy fixes. It's those things that are going to tear an incredible program apart. Testing for propagation, absolutely. Let's test it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's more science. And again, you can say, look, it doesn't work for quail, it doesn't work for pheasants. Did it work for turkeys? Right? Those are mostly trap and transfer, but holy cow, I'd love somebody to get the turkeys off my back deck. I mean, they're making a mess. Right? So, I mean, it does work, and it can work for fisheries, and it can work in any number of different ways, but no one's proved that it can work. Let's learn from it.
A couple of just comments also about the population. Sage grouse are particularly difficult because they're so cyclical that if you want 500,000 birds out there, let's just take a round number, you got to basically manage toward like 1.6 million, because that's going to be the sort of deviations you're going to be seeing, how much rain you have, fire, anything else like that. It's an incredibly difficult animal to look at purely, but every state's going to be looking at the population, so they're going to generally know how many birds they have out there. They just don't want to sort of set the bar at a population. Basically, if you build a habitat and keep it there, they're going to come.
Well, and it's set against, we're looking at trends in general. I mean, at Upland, we always talk about trends, and what we're set against is 60 years of declining trends on almost every upland species across the board. So I think that that's where that kind of convenient contradiction comes in, where, you know, on one hand, we can say, as hunters, hey, forecasts are up. Well, that may be over last year. But, you know, over 60 years, that's six trending cycles. The populations are in decline almost across the board.
I think there's potentially a real success story with Sage Grouse, not only just the cooperation and the political story, but also I think, you know, so many actors now are engaged and understand what it takes to basically bring Sage Grouse back or to keep them away. Anything high is going to keep the Sage Grouse away. So it would be a transmission line, a wind tower, an oil derrick, anything like that. And we understand that a lot more now than we did 10 years ago. So I think industry, oil and gas industry, they can drill horizontally 7 miles. And you start doing that, you can sort of eliminate that footprint a lot, which is great for mule deer, which is great for a lot of other things. So I think that, you know, I think there's going to be a good story as long as we don't screw it up. Now, Wyoming legislature has never been a bad idea, couldn't embrace. So even, you know, that need, the governor just thinks Cap Reed is a fool's errand, but the legislator wants to waste $100,000 or whatever it is on this, he can't stop. And
yeah. So, you know, I'm all for that science, but it's not an answer yet.
I don't think it'll ever be an answer. I think it's what I look at it as a potential tool that has so far proven to not be of any help or not help on a landscape scale. But in terms of Gunnison sage grouse, what they're finding is it's because, as you know, the Gunnison sage grouse is a much smaller population island. And very tenuous as to whether or not they're going to be able to make it. So they're looking at that as a way to prop it up in the event that we could eventually get habitat back to sustainable levels. You know, but I don't, you know, I'm all for everybody's details.
There's the magic word. When you get habitat back to a sustainable level, you can't have one without the other. Any type of release program assumes there's a base habitat to sustain that population. And we are not there yet. And that's the magic part. Let's get this ready.
I know that most of the action is with Interior here, but could you speak a little bit about USDA's Sage Grouse initiative?
Boy, USDA has been spectacular.
And talk about any changes you've seen with the new secretary.
Not in this world. So at Pheasants Forever, we're actually one of the fiscal agents for the Sage Grouse initiative. We manage the funding for the university studies. For the communication side, we've got Farmville biologists, ranchland coordinators out there with boots on the ground who are, you know, sitting down with those ranchers. Those ranchers have lined up, have committed to make improvements on this, you know, with some assurance that no matter what happened in that decision, they would be allowed to continue, like they have for generations, to ranch those lands. Their legacy wouldn't be lost. And there's so many little things. They talked about one of the very simple things to mitigate mortality is putting little white, tin flaps on the cattle fencing, right? When little birds fly, they fly about 3 feet off the ground. And they had about a 30% mortality on these sage grouse hitting this wire. Something as simple as your name card on that wire, they would just climb over it, right? Something as simple as that.
I think what today, USDA has put in through the Sage Grouse initiative, $250 million.
Oh, it's a huge number. And in fact, you know, the message was when the bird was determined that it was not going to be listed, NRCS came back and said, okay, we're going to do Sage Grouse 2.0, and they committed another 5-year commitments of hundreds of millions of dollars into that program. And I think that's the magic part. No one's gone home here. Everyone's still out there. We need to deliver this in a big way. That's when the work started again, right? When it wasn't listed, now we got to go do the work. Anything before that was just a handshake and a promise, right? And that's the fear factor of the environmental, or of the Endangered Species Act, right? It's about the future. It's not
It's
about
also
where you
why the ideologues in Congress are trying to blow this up, because the last thing they want is a success story involving the Endangered Species Act, which is what we have here. This is how the act should work. Do something for a species, for a whole bunch of species, before it ever gets listed.
So we're walking into that right now with the monarch butterfly. They have 2 years.
June 2019, we've had less than 2 years.
Yeah. There's your poster child to be relevant to downtown Minneapolis, to Des Moines. Any 4th grade child in school went through that, right? And it's not just about the monarch, it's about pollinators. It's about a grassland that in Minnesota we've got, what, 2% left of a prairie? Right? And how does agriculture fit into that? Where are neonics? How do they impact monarchs, pollinators? What do, and you know, people ask me, why are we even involved, why is Pheasant Forever involved in monarchs or pollinators? What do little baby chicks need, pheasants and or quail, in the first 20 days? They only eat insects. They're not eating seeds. They need that protein, and that's all they eat. So we need pollinators in a big way. Why don't I burn my time here?
All right, that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. So clearly, the thrust of the last couple of days has been